Hi everyone, welcome to part 4 of our Greyhound adoption series. We're going to be talking about socialising your greyhound with other animals and other dogs. So we're going to do a cat training one specifically for further on. So if you've got small animals like cats or rabbits or chickens, that would be really, really useful. But this one's just talking mostly about other dogs and how we can help your greyhound adapt. So the first thing I want to say is, from a greyhound's perspective, every part of their DNA, every part of their breeding and their training up until the point that you've taken them home, or rather they've come into the rehoming kennels, has been telling them the right thing to do is to chase and catch the small fluffy thing in the distance. So it's obviously a huge change when we would then take their greyhound home and that small fluffy thing might be living in the house with us, or it might be your mum's dog that comes to visit, it might be the neighbour's dog, it might be all the ones running loose around the dog park, and suddenly we're trying to battle with thousands of years of breeding and hundreds of hours of training potentially that have gone into exactly what we don't want to do. So that's why we need to take this part of habituating your greyhound to life as a pet quite seriously. So throughout, I'll just do a quick disclaimer here. My training is in people psychology, not in greyhounds, and not in particularly addressing problem dogs. However, I have volunteered for GAP for a number of years. I've worked in the rehoming kennels, I've worked as a foster carer, and I've worked with a number of wonderfully capable trainers. And this is the one issue that's come up again and again and again that we've had to work on and manage. So I think I've got lots of good information to share. However, if you've got a greyhound that's having a particular problem, I think it's well worth contacting a reliable and qualified and experienced trainer. And this kind of information that I'm going to give you is just the generic spiel that we do for greyhounds that are coming out of the rehoming kennels to help kind of set them up for success early on. So long story short, if you've got a greyhound that is having issues with these in this area, please get in touch with us or in touch with the trainer. And as far as preventing these issues go, let's listen in. So first things first, we've talked about how you're going to be battling DNA and battling a lot of things. One thing to be really aware of is that in most training processes, we want to start with something in the distance and build it closer. So we want to talk about the threshold of when your greyhounds can cope with it and reducing the distance between you and this thing that's either triggering the response of fear or overexcitement or whatever it is. With greyhounds, it's a little bit different because when it's in the distance, sometimes it's even more exciting. So how we want to go about doing things is lowering the excitement levels. It's a really big factor, and it sounds really silly, but being calm and confident yourself is probably one of the biggest changes you can make to helping your dog learn to socialise with other breeds of dog, particularly small dogs. So we notice it time and time again. I can take the greyhound for a nice walk and it can walk around the small dogs with no problems whatsoever, and we might have an inexperienced staff member or an inexperienced adopter who just managed the lead a little bit differently, and the greyhound suddenly has flicked from just being calm and relaxed and not paying much attention to being a little bit more excitable and possibly starting a little bit of mischief. So being really calm and confident yourself will make a really, really big difference with how your greyhound is socialising with other animals. So let's go right back to the beginning. Your greyhound will have been assessed, if it's rehomed by GAP, as safe to be around other breeds of dogs. Now, it's really important to note that these assessments are done in controlled conditions in a kennel environment with experienced handlers. That doesn't necessarily translate to how your dog's going to react and behave when it's out in the big wide world, especially when it gets a little bit overexcited or is overfaced with a little bit too much too soon. So the first thing we're going to take note of, and the first step, is to make sure that our greyhound has a few days at home to learn about us before we expose it to the big wide world. So teaching your greyhound how to respond to its name, a watch me command is a really, really good idea. Learning to follow the feel of the lead, so you're not having to yank it around everywhere. It's listening and looking for direction. all of that comes well before you're introducing it to other breeds of dog. So that's one of the main reasons that we have a pretty strict keep your greyhound at home for the first 3 days policy, is so that we're working on all of those things before we chuck them in. And we don't want to be chucking them in the deep end, but before we expose them to the big wide world. So yeah, first things first, building a relationship with your hound. Second things second, how we want to expose and interact for the first few times our greyhounds with other breeds of dog is to pretty much pay them no attention. The worst thing you can do is let your greyhound rush up to other breeds of dog, particularly small dogs. It's really intimidating for the small dog who's going to get a fright and probably try and disappear. Greyhounds want to chase things that move. So if your small dog's moving fast, suddenly they've gone from wanting to interact and say hello to wanting to chase and grab it. So making sure that you've got your greyhound under control and you've got a nice big bubble around your greyhound and are respecting the small dog's bubble, or the other breed of dog's bubble for that matter, is a really, really important start as well, and something we want to be really mindful of. The next thing is a little technique. It has a very fancy term of a parallel walk. It basically means going for a walk side by side. This is a really good one you can use if you've got an existing dog at home that you're going to be introducing your greyhound to. So rather than having both dogs rush up to each other with excitement, so you get your greyhound out of the car and you've got your other dog out of the house and it's all a bit exciting. It can be a bit like I always refer to it, two drunk guys at the pub. You're never sure whether it's going to be a hug or a punch when they do finally get to meet. So avoiding that situation entirely, keeping the dogs separate, letting them go for a quiet walk together in a little mutual zone, whether it's just up and down the drive 3 or 4 times is probably perfect, even just round the backyard a few times, ideal, until that energy level has died down. You'll notice the body language in the dogs has changed. They're more relaxed, they're sniffing things, they're stopping, they're pausing, they're thinking. When they're at that level, that's when I quietly let them say hello to each other and have a sniff. And a really good tip is to intervene before they've had too much of a sniff as well. So rather than letting them circle around for ages and do lots of sniffing, in the early stages, helping parent your greyhound a little bit and teach it some social skills is a really good idea. So just intervening and interrupting that hello quite early on, I think is a really, really good idea. So why are we doing that? If we want to think about a greyhound, we've already talked about how they're bred and trained to chase and grab the small fluffy thing. The other side of the coin is that they've only really ever been around greyhounds. And greyhounds tend to have quite different social skills than other breeds of dog. You'll notice if you put a group of greyhounds in a paddock together, most of them, all they want to do is play race games. They don't want to wrestle, they don't want to play fetch, they don't want to play with toys half the time, they just want to race each other. And things can get out of hand quite quickly because they are so competitive. That's when your muzzle is really, really important. If they are in that competitive mode, especially early on, they're likely to try and nip things. If they're small dogs, they may be likely to grab them. So having the muzzle on is really, really important. Ideally, we would put them in the position that they're going to try and nip or grab something. But if you are concerned, using your muzzle, really, really important for that. So having the opportunity for your greyhound to very gradually expose it and introduce itself to other breeds of dogs is much, much more important than kind of flooding it and chucking it in the deep end and letting it meet all your neighbours' friends and all the dogs in the neighbourhood in those first few days. Now, depending on the dog, most of the greyhounds, I'd say within sort of 3 or 4 months, they're pretty competent and kind of starting to read other breeds of dogs' body language. For some of them, it does take a little bit longer and they need a little bit more of a helping hand. If that's the case, please get in touch with us and please let your rehoming team help you with this. There's a lot we can do. I regularly go with walks and catch up with people. We've got, seen Zena already, our little hunt-away pointer cross. She's a really good introduction for the greyhounds. She's bilingual by now. She can speak greyhound as well as regular dog. So she's got great body language and really, really helpful for introducing them to other breeds of dog. And at the same time, she's similar enough shape to a hound, a greyhound, that they're not too freaked out. We do get a few that when they see a husky or a spaniel or something a bit odd looking, kind of their eyes fall out of their head and they wonder what on earth that alien thing is wandering around the streets. So taking things slowly is, I think, the first and foremost, the most important step. The other thing that I want to say is prevention is far better than having to work on the issue. So managing your greyhound's interactions really carefully and really closely for the first few weeks is really, really important, so that they don't get put in a position that they can cause trouble or get into mischief. Just a quick word on dog parks while we're here. The rehoming team in particular don't really feel that greyhounds have much of a place in dog parks, especially in the initial stages when they're settling in. It can be a little bit like a mosh pit full of all over excitement and not a lot of common sense. So keeping your greyhound away from that environment, especially at busy times, is really, really suggested. Down the track, if your greyhound's a bit more competent and savvy, perhaps meeting a friend there for a quiet run around is fine. But yeah, in early days, we absolutely would not be letting our greyhound off lead amongst small dogs, even muzzled. Until you've got a really reliable and really established recall and control over your dog when it is loose. So that can take some time to develop, and that's all part of the process. The last thing I want to cover is those who have second dogs. So you might have, most of our adopters who have two dogs have two greyhounds, but we do have two that have other breeds as well. We do have, a few that have other breeds as well, I should say. So if you've got a greyhound and a second dog, just be a little bit mindful. We've got a multi-dog handout, which will be in your adoption pack, and there's lots of information. All of the information I've talked about is also on our website. So do have a really good read through that as well. But things that can cause trouble with your multi-dog household is generally resource guarding different items. So food, it's a big one, so we want to feed our dogs separately, ideally out of each other's sight. To start with, one inside, one outside, or outside at different times, or one in the crate and one in the lounge, whatever you need to do. Feeding them separately, really, really good idea to start with, and supervising feeding times. That may be something that becomes a permanent thing that you do supervise. It's highly recommended. I don't ever leave my dogs alone with food and hope for the best. We have Billy, who has a very high opinion of himself, and Chad, who doesn't like to share, so I could guarantee that we would need a vet visit if they were to try and both chew on the same bone. It just would not work out well for anyone. So we don't have food left alone. They get turns, they can go outside with the bone, and we one at a time, and that works well for us. The other thing that we kind of forget about is what I call hot items. So food's a really obvious one, but the other ones can include toys or beds, even just personal space. Like you might have a greyhound that's considered the couch their own space and reluctant to share that. So just managing the resources, making sure you're supervising and kind of watching the behaviour to start with is a really, really good idea while your greyhound's learning and settling in. If you've got another dog in the house, whether it be a greyhound or not. The last thing I want to say is a little word on, we talk about predatory behaviour and prey drive and things like that, and just be a little bit mindful of how those terms are used. It's quite a complex issue when you look into it with a little bit more of a science hat on. So you will see advice and things like that online about it. My suggestion is, if you've got any questions or you are having any issues, please talk to us in person. Each greyhound is different, and what you could be seeing and what we could be seeing might be completely different things. So please, that's a time to ask for a bit of help and have some personalised and tailored information and feedback, and that's what we're here for. So don't hesitate to get in touch. So hopefully that's been a little bit helpful for talking about greyhounds and their interactions with other dogs. Where we'll go from here, we're going to talk about greyhounds with other animals, so cats and things like that, before we talk about the rest of the settling in process. So hopefully we'll see you soon.